Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, where we take an in-depth look at how news from around the world is affecting Taiwan. I'm Hamio Khan. North Korea's leader Kim Jong Un recently made headlines when he visited a rocket site in Russia. At the same time, North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles off its coast. This is Kim's first trip out of North Korea since 2019, and the Russian president has said the two leaders will not stop short of discussions on military matters. But the meeting comes amid warnings from Washington that the two countries should not trade weapons. But could this be the rise of another Cold War? To answer this, I'm joined by Dr. Edward Howell. Now, Edward is the only professor at Oxford University conducting ongoing research on contemporary North Korean affairs. So let's dive right in. What have been the most significant moments from North Korea leader Kim Jong Un's visit in Russia thus far?
I think one of the most important outcomes is the fact that the meeting went ahead. The two leaders issued statements affirming the solidarity between the two countries and highlighting that this is only the start of their relationship. This is something that will obviously have clear ramifications, particularly with respect to the role of China, but also what Kim Jong Un and Putin may discuss moving forward, particularly given how the North Korean leader has decided to extend his stay in Russia rather than return home immediately to the DPRK.
How significant is that he did extend the stay? Because these visits are, again, unannounced and very, very rare. But the fact that he did extend it a few days, how significant is that?
It's certainly not what was expected. And I think it highlights two things. I think, firstly, it highlights the nature of the relationship between the two states. And obviously, we will have to see how this develops given China's importance here. China does not want to lose out on its status as North Korea's main economic lifeline. And China would not be pleased if North Korea simply shuns the PRC in favor of Russia. But secondly, North Korea under Kim is determined to develop its satellite and technological capabilities for its unconventional weapons. And this is very important because we know that in recent months, North Korea's record on satellite launches has been very poor. And its last remaining satellite is about to fall out of orbit sometime soon. So this is a clear, urgent priority for Kim Jong Un.
And when we talk about the priority, Russia is looking to restock its arsenal of these artillery shells. But do you think that is this more of an actual need for a military operation, or is this more of an optics in the sense of what is Russia trying to gain from North Korea with this meeting?
So initially, my view was that the meeting was purely transactional. Okay, North Korea had its own wish list of food assistance, financial assistance, cash, but also technological assistance and advice. And Putin needed artillery to continue his artillery fire in Ukraine. This is still the case in my view, but what we also see is, yes, a broader optical element targeting both domestic and international audiences, targeting the US and the US allies in Northeast Asia, but also targeting the respective population in Russia and Pyongyang. We saw that this summit and photos from the meeting was broadcast on the front pages of North Korean state newspapers.
We recently saw North Korea celebrate its 75th anniversary, and Russian officials were present at the celebration. I think this is maybe the second time that we've seen them there. How would you say North Korea and Russian relations have evolved over the past couple of years or the past decade?
So if we go back a little bit further than that, during the Cold War, the relations were cordial but not always smooth sailing. It's only really when Putin becomes the Russian leader that we see a warming of relations between Moscow and Pyongyang. Over the past decade, well, in 2014, Russia paid off 90% of North Korea's debt, Cold War era debt to the Soviet Union. This amounted to over 11 billion. And actually, this really highlighted perhaps the start of Russia's relationship with North Korea. Over the past couple of years, particularly after Russia invaded Ukraine, we see Pyongyang taking Russia's side, blaming the US, using the war as a way of blaming the US. And now we see a clear transactional element to the interaction. as well as the ongoing war in Ukraine, which would mean that, at least in my view, for as long as the war continues, Russia will continue to take North Korea's side.
What happens next, or what's the next step for North Korea once it does have this sort of information or this sort of backing from Russia?
So I guess first and foremost, we need to remember that we don't know if an arms deal has been signed. And Russia has been very, very reluctant to say anything in this regard. This is very important because if an arms deal were signed, then Russia would be in violation of UN sanctions. And this would mean that the UN Security Council, of which Russia is a permanent member, becomes even more mired in difficulty. Now, what could happen for North Korea moving forward is that Pyongyang will continue what Kim Jong Un outlined in January 2021 at the 8th Party Congress, when he basically outlined a wish list, a shopping list of conventional and unconventional weapons. Satellite development was one of them. Continued missile development was another. And we know that North Korea likes to use the language of a satellite launch when it's testing missile technology. So we can expect to see an acceleration in Pyongyang's missile development, even as its domestic economic performance continues to falter.
Now let's zoom out and take a look at how the rest of the world is reacting to this visit. A statement from the White House says that national security officials from the United States, Korea, and Japan held a call on Thursday to discuss the meeting between Putin and Kim. How have the US and its allies reacted to this meeting?
Yes, so even before the meeting took place, we saw the US make clear that actually any arms deal between Russia and North Korea would be met with severe consequences on both sides. What we see is that there is a growing need, and I think that the US was aware of this, a growing need to strengthen and reassure South Korea and Japan, its ironclad allies in Northeast Asia, as well as Taiwan. We know the special relationship between Washington and Taipei. This is important because the US presence in South Korea and the US's hub and spokes alliances in Northeast Asia isn't just about deterring China or deterring North Korea. It's very much about reassuring allies. And we saw this in the Camp David summit between Kishida, Yoon, and Biden. And I think the meeting between Kim Jong Un and Putin is going to make the US really think more about strengthening its existing relations between North Korea. And the meeting between Putin and Kim is really going to make the US work to strengthen its relations with South Korea and with Japan, particularly given how only at the very start of this year, there were reports that South Korea was considering going down the nuclear route itself. And this is something that the US was and remains very keen to avoid.
Along the lines of US and South Korea kind of joint statements, those officials have agreed that North Korea and Russian arms cooperation would violate UN sanctions. Is the UN Security Council, and in the research you've done, is it in a position to actually enforce those sanctions, or what position is it in?
Yes, so this is the issue. The UN Security Council, ever since North Korea withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003, the UN Security Council has really had very weak enforcement power, trying to get North Korea back into the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And even beyond the nuclear area, next year it will be the 10th anniversary of the release of the UN Commission of Inquiry report on North Korea's human rights situation. Again, North Korea simply dismissed the report. So the UN Security Council is in an increasingly difficult situation of trying to restrain not just Russia, but also North Korea, particularly given how, even though in the past Russia has supported sanctions on North Korea's nuclear development, now we're in a situation where actually Russia is going to be much more likely, if not always, to take North Korea.
And when you mentioned the Camp David Accords, one of the agreements that came out of that was this sort of stepping up of increased military cooperation between the three countries. And we've seen the United States increase its presence in Korea. Some argue that that increased presence is just putting pressure on North Korea to continue these weapons programs. And then we have an endless cycle of weapons tests and exercise. What do you think should be the first step to kind of de-escalate the Korean Peninsula?
The US ROK military exercises cannot simply stop. When Trump first met Kim Jong Un, the exercises reduced in scale, but they did not stop completely. What's important is that actually the US and South Korea and Japan, whose economic zone is the place where North Korean missiles frequently fall into, need to ensure that all three countries are in agreement as to the nature of this cooperation. This is partially what the Camp David summit aimed to achieve. The Biden administration has made clear that it would happily talk to North Korea without conditions, but given how Kim Jong Un's sister, has made very clear recently that they won't talk to the US at all, the US really is stuck in terms of restarting the dialogue.
So clearly, the security environment in Asia is very closely linked from South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, all the way up to Northeast Asia. Is there anything that Taiwan should be looking at in the sense of, with this cooperation towards the North, would this incite China to join this sort of post-Cold War relationship, or is there anything that Taiwan needs to be on the lookout for with this sort of integration happening up north?
So, the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu proposed that Russia, China, and North Korea start their own trilateral military drills. At the moment, I'm somewhat skeptical that we will actually see anything of this sort. And at the moment, I see the relationship between Russia, China, and North Korea much more of a transactional relationship than any form of strategic triangle. This may change over time. At the moment, China has been quite quiet about the meeting between Putin and Kim, but that doesn't mean to say that China will not respond in the future. I think what this shows Taiwan is the need to strengthen its relationship with the US, to keep that relationship going, and that actually the potential for China to get involved in Russia-North Korea relations is high, however that may be, because in my view, China does not want to be seen to be missing out on anything on the Korean Peninsula, particularly given how China was a signatory to the Korean War Armistice Agreement in 1953. So if anything were to happen involving the Korean Peninsula, I think very strongly that China will assert itself and want to be a party to anything, any future outcome.
Is there any reason why China is being a little neutral in the meeting between North Korea and Russia, in the sense of has been quite vocal about their agreements?
Yes, I mean, we've seen China take a similar stance when Xi Jinping met Putin earlier this year. Xi Jinping wanted to be seen as this kind of mediator. And even during 20 years ago now, the six-party talks hosted by Beijing to try and get North Korea to denuclearize, China's role there China wanted to be seen as a sort of neutral mediator. But I think there will come a point when China obviously cannot keep taking this role, particularly given its recent statements in relationship to the broader relations that Beijing has with Washington. China has constantly accused the US of having a Cold War mindset.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for further developments in that region, but thank you so much, Howard, for your insights.
Thank you very much.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus, make sure to check us out on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.